Hello, everybody. Welcome. To start, though, I'm going to do some quick intros with me and then a wonderful gentleman we got here on the call. And then I got two other people who will intro themselves. So to start, my name is Phil Stern. I'm the partner program manager here at NUSO. I'm sure you guys have seen me a million times. I'm always on these things, right? But I've also got with me Nigel. Nigel, what do you do here at NUSO?
Good evening, everybody. My name is Nigel Smith. I'm the product coordinator for NUSO Connect Recorder, the product we're going to be talking about this evening. So if there's any questions, please jump in and we'll certainly do our best to answer any questions that you have.
Yes, that's right. So me and Nigel are actually going to disappear from the spotlight here for a bit. We will be back to do questions. As many of you know, we do questions at the end. So we like to leave 10 minutes or so at the end to dive into your questions. So if you have them as we're going through this webinar, jump into the Q&A, jot down your questions. But what I'm going to do now is Nigel's going to go away. I'm going to go away. And we've got two wonderful people here live at Channel Partners. Colleen, how you doing?
Oh, great, Phil. Thank you for the great introduction. We are doing things a little differently. Chris and I are going to introduce ourselves. I'm Colleen Sheely. I am the head of marketing here at NUSO. I have been in this customer experience, contact center, workforce management space for longer than I'm willing to admit. So with that, Chris, do you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Sure. I'm Chris Boulware. I am head of product here at NUSO. I've been coming to Channel Partners on and off for 15 years. It's always exciting to see all the buzz that comes to us with Channel Partners here in Vegas. So we're excited to come to you today to talk about some of the things that we're hearing specifically around call recording today.
Yeah. So I'm gonna dive into some questions again. The Q&A manager is open. Phil and Nigel will be answering those while Chris and I are going over the questions we have prepared. And then we might have a surprise guest at the end, but you might have to wait for that one. So, okay, I'm going to dive in. Okay, so this one here, dear to my heart, coming from the contact center world. So when did recording stop being a QA tool and start becoming a compliance issue?
Absolutely. Yeah. Colleen, as you know, when really call recording originated in that contact center customer engagement space. Everyone was using QA initially for things to improve customer relationship, customer engagement, monitoring that transaction between agent and customer. Calls were recorded for training purposes. We'd all hear that, your call was being recorded for quality and training assistance. And we've seen that transition shape and take place actually fairly slowly over the course of the last 15 years, primarily driven by the information that was being shared within the call. So information like your personal information regarding your finances, your health care, your anything really PCI related, help create laws that then we all as an industry had to react to. And so that's kind of how we've got to a situation where compliance reporting is a requirement from many of our partners and customers today.
Yeah, things like GDPR, all the different regulations.
Absolutely. Yeah. I need a lift in this call.
Yeah. That we could do a whole call around.
Absolutely.
Okay, so that leads itself. So the next topic is really, and this is part of the session title is what changed with hybrid work that caught organizations off guard.
Yeah, so really the biggest thing that happened, obviously, was around COVID. There was no warning. There was no prep work for many organizations. While few had kind of dabbled their foot into the water, this overnight changed the way that we deal with call recording. So no longer was there a centralized location and a single source of where that information was being delivered to. For example, we now take calls on Teams and Zoom and our cell phone and our mobile devices. And so once those calls were delivered, where was that call being processed? Where was that data being stored? Were they in a compliant situation? Agents didn't also spend a lot of time being educated on the fact that this information needed to be compliant and in a single source location where this information wasn't leaked to the world. And so that was obviously the biggest event that changed the dynamic of this environment and the need for compliant reporting in our space today.
Right. And then you layer in the complexity of some of these global organizations and just the amount of regulations that you have to look at country by country.
if you think
Never
about
ends.
it, we go back to COVID times and people couldn't even figure out how to get the calls delivered to their agent.
Yeah.
So I'm just calling you back on a cell phone where there's lost calls or information being shared around the globe at that point that, truly wasn't in a compliant.
Yeah. Well, and one thing I would say, being around in that time with some of the bigger contact centers, so I worked at an organization that had a lot of legacy customers that said that they would never, ever do work from home.
Yes.
Ever. And when
this was
COVID
one of the big
happened-
reasons why,
Yeah.
honestly,
Yeah.
because they had created an environment where they knew everything was locked down, secure, stable. They were protected as an organization, and COVID bricked all that away.
Well, and okay, so we did do a little research around a use case of some of these risks and maybe the cost of not paying attention to this. And there's a large healthcare organization with a large contact center organization that rolled out an AI-enabled phone system, recording calls, transcribing them, analyzing the conversations with AI. But at this healthcare organization, the patients weren't clearly informed of that third-party system. And this, the class action that came forward, tapped into the federal wiretap laws. So, I mean, what you're putting yourself at risk for, I think we're just scratching the surface on all the things we need to think through. And the interesting part is it wasn't bad intent. It was a gap in governance. So that is the next question I have for you is where are other areas organizations are most exposed today without even really realizing?
Yeah. So, larger organizations obviously have, full compliant departments, people that are solely responsible for chasing and following laws. Laws vary by country. They vary by state. Now we talk about cross-state interactions. What are the requirements for those types of transactions? And so when you get down into these smaller organizations that have a need for recording of interactions with their customers, obviously everyone needs to understand their customer engagement. And this is a surefire way to be able to accomplish that. We introduce all of these new concerns, many that people don't even realize are a requirement for them. Things like, AI consent, that, the big buzz here, and we'll talk a little more about that, I'm sure, over the course of this conversation. But, is there a third party involved in that conversation? And did we get permission? And does the customer understand what is being recorded and how that data is being stored? Things like transcription and summary and consent. Where is the customer aware that they've agreed to these things in a 2-second recording at the beginning of a call that says your call is being recorded for quality or compliant concern?
Right. And then that, one of the things that we really need to think through, and I know we hear this, it's in, I think, every RFP that we respond to, and we have partners and customers coming to us asking for this, that ability to respond to an audit. So what does being ready for an audit mean?
Yeah. So compliance is one thing. Audit readiness is a completely another topic. The ability to quickly, when I say quickly, I'm not talking days and weeks, I'm talking hours and minutes, be able to go into a single location, be able to find that call of record, understand who was involved, both the calling party and the receiving party, understand how to access that recording, who has permissions to get access to that recording. All are important things in an audit trail. And specifically to NUSO, we offer a solution that has a fully compliant audit trail that is available. However, each of these compliance situations for your end customer vary. Compliance is a general umbrella, and understanding your customer's compliant needs and what they require for an audit is key.
And wouldn't be a session in 2026 without bringing up the next topic, but how is AI changing the compliance conversation we're having?
It is the single biggest accelerator in our industry today. We don't go more than about a minute and 30 seconds on any conversation, both here at Channel Partners and in our day-to-day lives without talking about AI. There is huge opportunity with the AI conversations that we're having. There's also a lot of risk.
Yeah.
And so we would we certainly have to address that. A lot of risks that many of us are still navigating the space in. Things with AI, such as data transcription and your sentiment and your summary and the intent of those calls. How is all of that, being handled, and who has responsibility for that? It all is kind of driving the conversation we're hearing quite a bit at this event.
Yeah.
So
I think there's still questions. We have some answers, but lots of questions.
this is definitely a landscape that is changing daily, weekly, hourly at this point. So, we are as an organization meeting with, our attorneys and advisors and organizations that we strongly align with, that are other people in the industry, to make sure that we are staying ahead of those kind of conversations. But, that landscape is continuing to evolve, certainly.
Yep. Okay. And we've been here at Channel Partners for about a day and a half. And we've had lots of conversations with the opening night party last night.
Yeah.
What are some of the themes you're hearing?
Really, what is the partners' involvement in all of this? Obviously, channel partners, there's a lot of partners here. We're great to see them all. But, their questions to me continue to be, how do I get involved? What is my responsibility in this? And so to that question, I usually say things like having a strong partner that is doing training, that is transparent about the roadmap and what feature functionality is available to you. Having a product that allows you to adjust and scale dependent upon your customer's needs. So, what their financial capabilities are in having a compliant solution in ways that, some of those costs can be augmented is all very important. Really, though, in my personal opinion, a channel first vendor is the number one thing that you're looking for. How is that vendor going to go arm in arm with you, with things like quality sales engineers, to uncover your customer's requirements? Because having educated conversations with your customer, not just saying things like, yeah, we record calls, is all going to be very important as we continue to go down this journey of call recording.
Yeah. And I think an organization that puts that partner first, that things are moving so fast. If that partner does not have a seat at the table around some of this development and some of the ways that things we're going to market and they're going to market, then it really can't have that thought leadership conversation. So, okay. All right, Phil, I've been seeing a couple questions come in through the Q&A manager. Do you want to open it up and see if we can answer some of those questions?
Yeah. So thank you, Colleen. That was great. Both of you. I've seen a few questions specifically about Matt, our CEO. I hear he announced something pretty big today.
Yeah. Yes, he did. So I think the best thing to do, Chris, is maybe have Matt come over and answer that.
You think?
I think so.
All right.
So, all right. We're doing Thank Chip, but we're going to bring Matt over. Matt? All right, Matt, I'm going to give you my mic here. So Chris and I have been talking about compliance and compliant reporting. And I know I got to see you on stage this morning, and you spent a lot of time really talking through really streamlining and making sure that you have visibility from end to end through the conversation. And right now, some organizations have maybe like 11 different vendors that they're moving that interaction, that experience through, and then it's kind of a opaque box. So you made an announcement this morning, but if you can kind of answer that question, and then please let us know what you announced on stage.
Sure. Thanks, Colleen. So, there's a few things. I heard just as I was walking by a few minutes ago talking about NUSO still having an agent first and partner first focus, focusing on the channel, making sure that we're actually building the things necessary to support what you're needing. And one of the things we've looked at, which led into the whole idea of what we announced this morning, was that by having 5, 10, 15 different vendors needed to be able to cobble together a solution where all of a sudden on a Tuesday, someone makes a change in an API and it breaks the 7th thing that's actually connected into your mix, really is a challenge to not only supportability, the actual confidence that your customer and you will have in the solution, but it really is not channel first. Even if they're selling it from a channel first perspective, the problem is that you're the one who picks up the phone when the customer calls and says all of this stuff doesn't work. So from our solution standpoint, we announced something called NUSO Black this morning. So much like you have an exclusive experience, we believe that our design with having AI, but in a deterministic way, I'm going to explain that here for a second, for compliance reasons and being able to have things like a compliance recorder, we'll be extending the compliance recorder environment to be able to deliver things like beacons and immutable traceability into the actual recording. So you know when a message escalated to a voice call, escalated to a video call, all the way through the entire mix, and having it all on a single platform. So instead of having to have 5, 10, 11 different vendors, being able to tie those together across the mix. Also, the most important part of this already in place. So you've heard us talk about some of our AI capabilities at the core of the network. NUSO Flex, for example, real world example, battle tested, 3.1 million calls saved during the Hurricane Beryl situation by being able to take things that were literally flooded and reroute inbound calls around to other locations. So this is not something where you have just outbound redundancy and not something where we have toll-free redundancy, but true local inbound calls where the local deli is actually able still to get calls for people to get their lunch orders in.
Yeah.
When you have damage within the PSTN network. By us having that part of our AI journey, part of our mix, we've defined something that's deterministic instead of ephemeral. You'll hear a lot more about that from us. Something that instead of just being fancy and elastic because it was the latest thing that the AI agent told you should build, experience and knowledge on being able to run the carrier network itself to be able to deliver those services long term. That's a key part of what we're offering. So a lot of what we talked about today.
Great. And Phil, do we have any other questions in the question manager we need to answer today? If not, I've got a couple more I could ask Matt.
Well, I'd love it. We had one question that came through, but you guys actually kind of answered it as we were talking.
Okay.
But I'll just, again, if anybody has questions, go to the Q&A, drop us your questions now. We've got time. Colleen, let's interrogate Matt some more.
Yeah, we're going to interrogate Matt a little bit. So you mentioned something on stage this morning about AI slop, which I find really interesting because we're all becoming experts and we're all starting to build things. Can you talk about what AI slop means to you?
Yeah. So, AI slop generally, when most people talk about it, is when they prompt something, try and get an application built, and it kind of sort of mostly works enough to be able to get a minimum viable product out, and then it doesn't really scale or be able to get to where it needs to be. We think about that in terms of not only the individual application, but also how all of that works across being able to integrate multiple pieces and be able to have that AI in place to be able to support API integrations. We've experienced it. I'm sure you've experienced it. You tried to actually implement any of these tools where you have this real problem with being able to think the integration actually is there, but you don't have the ability to get a app or an acknowledgement that actually it came back through or a subscribe message in the way that it was built. Those are the kinds of things that are really, really important to make sure you have built out. It's one of the things that we're designing with NUSO Black to make sure that we have all of the elements are independently verifiable and then also able to be connected both for that immutable traceability. So it's two long words, but it just means that we actually understand exactly where every message and call and interaction happens at each one of the steps. Whereas right now, that's not something that occurs within, I would argue, 95 to 97% of all the AI systems that are actually deployed out there, especially AI auto attendant solutions that for the most part are out there. You're not going to be able to get understanding of exactly where and how the call was routed and how it was actually handled by either the agent or a human after it was actually transitioned to them.
Okay, I have one more question, and then I think we might be coming up against time. But this is more, and maybe the audience that we have on the call might have a little bit more knowledge around this, but I think it's becoming somewhat of an AI buzzword, this concept of beacons. What is a beacon? And B, how does it relate to how NUSO will solve for complaint reporting processes?
Yeah, so beacons are virtual conversations. So what they are is you'll see them often marketed now by a few of the AI auto attendant companies that are being able to say, here's how a call actually came into the network. Here's what happened with an agent. Here's what the sentiment was that ends the transcript, and put it into a single record. The problem with that is that's only covering 10% of the story. You don't know whether or not there was call quality issues at one point where it came in, whether or not the customer got stuck in a loop before they ever made it to the AI auto attendant, whether or not they first left a voicemail and zeroed out to go back to the auto attendant. You don't know any of that if you're just talking about that last 10%. And that's what we're actually putting in place, is the ability to understand exactly where the customer lives. So that happens in two ways. One is a manager across the entire call control plane, which actually builds all of the single large beacon, but every single one of the systems that flows through and the interaction that happens there, it builds another secondary or a smaller beacon. Happy to have a technical conversation at some point with all of you if you want to have it about how all that flows in, but it rolls together to a single beacon that can be managed. But in the recorder environment, when you're actually looking at a recording, you can then see whether or not any of the replay of the activity that happened prior to them actually deploying audio, or in moments where they did deploy audio and where other things were being calculated. So you can understand exactly the entire journey for the customer. Again, back to that, they message in first. In that message, you return a message back to them asking them to go ahead and give you a call. You actually then flow that through, or you use a WebRTC call to bring that audio in. Then all the way to the point where they say, well, I really need to see what is happening in a contact center environment, say if you're doing customer support or something like that, and then escalating that yet to a video call. So you're able to follow all three of those, not have three separate beacons. You have to try and figure out what happened. That's the
Trying to
difference.
stitch those calls together, no longer required.
That's right. Exactly.
All right, Phil, I think we are coming up against time. I'm going to hand it back to you.
Yeah, hand it back to me, because we do have a question here. And Nigel, I'm going to bring you on camera. A great question about recording, especially with two-party states that are involved. We've got a question on how is that handled? How do we notify customers that they are being recorded? What are strategies around that? And Nigel, I have a couple that I can go into, but is that something that you want to touch on specifically?
Well, we can jump into that straight away there, Phil. I mean, the recorder itself doesn't play announcements or inject announcements upfront, so it's really down to the underlying telephony platform to make those notifications about calls are being recorded and whether they agree or not agree. So really that gives the onus back to the customer. It's the customer's responsibility to ensure that those announcements are in place about legislation and compliance laws.
Right. And so, for example, an auto attendant, if you're using our NUSO Connect recorder on our platform, and you're of course on our UCAS, you just announce in your auto attendant, calls are being recorded for quality and training purposes. That's probably the most common one you've heard. There's many ways to do it. That's definitely the most common. You can even go deeper and do it on a queue level. So, for example, maybe you only need to record those sales calls in the sales queue. Let's have an announcement before every call that comes into that queue saying they're being recorded. So, great question on that. The other question is about residential. I'm going to get back to you after this call on that, because that's a really niche question I've never heard before. So I got to go talk to somebody about that. But yeah, let's see if we have any other questions. I think that's it. Yeah, we've got the residential. I'll get back to you on that one. Colleen, Chris, anything from you guys, the channel partners, before we wrap up?
Yeah, it's just really great to be here. It's great to spend the morning with everyone, or afternoon, I guess, depending on where you're sitting in the globe. And thanks for taking the time to meet with us today. Yeah, we'll talk soon.